Now, for the latest on Premier Li Keqiang's visit to India, let's talk to our correspondent Shweta Bajaj. She's joining us live from New Delhi. Thank you for speaking to us, Shweta. Well, of course, we are seeing this trade volume between China and India reaching $70 billion. But of course, the leaders of the two countries are expected to see more. So tell us, in what specific areas do we see China and India to expand their cooperation in terms of trade and investment?
Well, the year 2012 really wasn't a good one for trade, but that was largely because of what was happening in the Western world and the economic slowdown which was impacting India. For India, it was domestic issues like inflation and high interest rates that led to low trade volumes. Now, both the countries are looking at touching $100 billion by 2015, and the areas that they are planning to expand into include IT, pharmaceuticals, and also investment. Investment would be very important, especially in this infrastructure sector. Now, India needs a whole lot of investment in this particular sector. There are many Chinese companies already here. They want a larger presence, and the Indian Prime Minister said that he welcomes investment from China in the infrastructure sector. So that is what you will look at happening in the next few years. It could be huge in potential, and next step could also be the high-speed rail network that is likely to be built here in India in about 2 years from now. At this point in time, there are studies going on that, and China is interested in investment in that sector as well. But of course, the issue of balance of trade remains, which could be got to some sort of a parity with the fact that China would like to invest in India. Well, here in the studios in New Delhi, I have with me Mr. Jabin T. Jacob. He is the Assistant Director of Institute of Chinese Studies. Jabin, many thanks for joining us. What do you think could be the main takeaways from this particular trip of Li Keqiang, especially considering the fact that his second day was spent in India's financial capital?
I think the fact that the Chinese Premier chose to go to Mumbai suggests that he is aware of the power and potential of India's private sector. And the fact that he chose an IT company to visit indicates that the Chinese are aware of the prowess of Indian IT, and that this is an area where the Chinese could potentially benefit. Now, we already have some very important points in the joint statement. For one, there is the talk of the industrial clusters that the two countries could be targeting for each other's companies, which would give a focused direction for their investments, for their expanding their trade and so on. Then we've also had this very interesting business of twinning cities and provinces. I think that's the way to go for two large countries. To decentralize economic policy making, I think, is a very interesting way to go about expanding their ties. There's only so much that central governments can do, but you should leave the cities and the states and the provinces to deal with each other, their counterparts, and push their own initiatives for trade and so on. Plus, of course, the BCIM economic corridor. I think that's another excellent initiative because this means that the border areas, which are underdeveloped in both countries, can develop, have the potential of developing.
Coming back to that economic corridor that you talked about, how important do you think is, and how significant is the announcement of that? And also, do you believe that trade could settle the other disputes that India and China have?
See, the corridor is important, like I said, because this is an underdeveloped area that this corridor, the BCIM corridor, will be focusing on. Plus, it also ties in very well into another thing that the joint statement mentioned, which is that the two countries should be concentrating on joint efforts in other developing countries. So Myanmar is certainly one of those countries. Afghanistan is possibly another. Now, as to whether trade can settle all other differences, I think this was a big hope in India-China relations. But at this stage, that trade package or the trade basket is too simple: export of raw materials, import of manufactured goods as far as India is concerned. So trade can play that potentially stabilizing, beneficial role only if it is multifaceted, multi-layered, when there is movement, free movement of labor, businessmen and so on, which is why this whole issue of easing visa regulations is extremely important.
Right, Jabin, many thanks for joining us here in the studio. Jabin, there giving us a sense really of how trade could play an important role in bridging that gap between both the nations. Back to you.
Well, many thanks to you, Shweta, and many thanks to our guest in the studio. That was Shweta Bajaj reporting from New Delhi. Meanwhile,